Welcome to another episode of TrialSite News. On today's show, we're going to be discussing the decline in credibility of the gold star standard agencies, meaning the FDA, the CDC, and the NIH, as the CDC recently acknowledged that they made significant errors in their pandemic response, while the FDA has been hit with criticisms for engaging in crony capitalism and questionable high-profile decisions such as authorizing COVID-19 vaccination for babies as young as 6 months old. We're going to talk about what is going on here. And so, from TrialSite News, I am Adrian, and our episode is starting right now. So, the disaster that has been the U.S. Center for Disease and Control and Prevention, or the CDC, the Food and Drug Administration, and the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, continues to unfold, with fallout on all fronts and serious ramifications for the trio's credibility moving forward. From the CDC acknowledging that it bungled much of the pandemic response to high-profile departures in the FDA due to a series of questionable high-profile decisions, such as authorizing the COVID-19 vaccines for babies as young as 6 months old, to proactive wars on doctors who prescribe generic repurposed drugs for COVID-19, and clear industry capture in at least parts of the National Institutes of Health, which we here at TrialSite News have been chronicling the wild crony capitalism run amok, including regulatory capture throughout the pandemic at high levels of the U.S. Health and Human Services, as well as the White House itself. Now, these once prestigious gold standard agencies perhaps are no more due to a complete unraveling of clear objective decision-making, influenced by a combination of factors from industry influence to a lack of effective leadership silos and disempowered government talent. The decline in these agencies has become ever more pronounced as month by month a toxic mixture of pandemic hyper-overreaction, bureaucratization, and a revolving industry door have led to what could be a deadly one-two punch: regulatory capture and politicization, with the externalization of risk associated with such dynamics onto the public. Let's give an example. Let's talk about the eyebrow-raising decision for approval of vaccines, COVID vaccines, for babies as young as 6 months old without being sufficiently tested, or the lack of agency-independent external experts months prior to the approval of such doses for kids. What kind of risks are we potentially placing on these children? That's a big question, and it needs answers. These are but two examples raised by the highly respected and high-profile physician researchers Macri, a Johns Hopkins professor and public policy researcher, and Tracy Beth Hoeg, a physician epidemiologist with the Florida Department of Health. These two individuals recently shared their experience in a recent article found at Common Sense News, and in it they described how a senior FDA official told them that, quote, "It is like a horror movie I'm being forced to watch, and I can't close my eyes. People are getting bad advice, and we can't say anything." Macri and Hoeg reported that problems carry over to the NIH, whereas we here at TrialSite News have chronicled the clear and present commitment to expensive branded vaccines and drugs over investigations into repurposed drugs is happening. This despite the fact that hundreds of thousands of people died early on during the pandemic, with outspoken doctors screaming that patients should be treated with repurposed cocktails and combinations, while the wait for a vaccine carried on at the time. The NIH Foundation's Accelerating COVID-19 Therapeutic Interventions and Vaccines, or ACTIV, awarded billions of dollars to a handful of pharmaceutical companies while bypassing most generic drug investigations. An example of this would be an article that we wrote back in 2020, where we gave an accounting of this bias with articles like the NIH's Therapeutics Management of Patients with COVID-19 and Some Unanswered Questions About Disturbing Chasm, and Active Centralization, an important part of the COVID-19 fight, but smaller players and community left out. In these articles, we discussed the potential issue of community providers, entrepreneurial biotech ventures, and a demographic of cross-section of the U.S. missing from ACTIV, where there's no representation from state and local level care systems. Now, these were just a couple of prominent examples portraying the extreme bias in favor of industry, against patients, community health, and generic drugs. Now, weighing in on this, our founder here at TrialSite News, Daniel O'Connor, talked about this, saying that, quote, "The NIH is part of a drug development system that is completely based on incentivization for profits over actual health care. This is partially understandable as the business of drug development includes lots of risks and developers need to be incentivized. But what we have witnessed during the pandemic goes beyond the pale. Pure crony capitalist profiteering at the expense of the public. Pfizer will generate over $100 billion in just a couple of years, but holds no liability for their products, and their wanton violation of good regulatory practice is abundantly observable via our investigations. What kind of government allows any industry, let alone pharma, to run amok, run wild during a pandemic in such a brazen manner? One that isn't that smart, at least at the top, and doesn't understand proper regulation of industry and the public good. The last administration definitely started the out-of-control unchecked spending with Operation Warp Speed. A good concept if properly organized and managed with the right accountability, while the current Biden administration just intensified the problem with little critical thinking within his administration. And Biden doubled down, conspiring, we suspect, with big media and tech to censor the public, essentially running cover for pharma market moves, including profiteering. Now let's shift back to Macri and Hoeg's report in Common Sense. They said that at the NIH, doctors and scientists complained to us about low morale and lower staffing. The NIH's Vaccine Research Center has had many of its senior scientists leave over the last year, including the director, deputy director, and chief medical officer. With no leadership silos and heavy political and industry penetration, a scientist told Macri and Hoeg that suddenly there's an enormous number of jobs opening up at the highest level positions. Moreover, in all these agencies, we here at TrialSite News have written about the junk science, which is often incomplete science embraced by industry to promote and monetize investments, in this case often subsidized by the public. And it reigns supreme here. It doesn't hurt that the PrEP Act protects all profiteers from any liability. And Democrats in power have assured liberal buy-in into the madness by circulating billions of dollars into communities to buy into the narrative that those interested in alternatives, like, for example, consider repurposed drugs or any questioning of the vaccine development process, and so on and so forth, that these people are simply right-wing lunatics or anti-vaxxers or worse. Of course, those elements do exist, but a growing majority are simply concerned about their government and want answers into what in the world is going on. And in the meantime, on the left side of the spectrum, there is general discomfort, and it is growing with how the government across multiple agencies has handled the pandemic. The small business sector, for example, was nearly wiped out by the US government pandemic policy, while further enriching the largest corporations. An example of this would be Amazon, who is now dominating across the board. Now, perhaps both political parties have benefited from the mass media fanning of intensifying flames of division and disharmony between liberals and conservatives. So perhaps then it is time to empower the reform-minded professionals in government that want good, clean government, the kind of government that helps protect the people rather than using these citizens to benefit their corporate partners. Now, of course, I'm sure many will say that this is a Pollyanna hope and desire, and perhaps it is, but I think at least it is worth striving for. And of course, we will continue as ever always to keep you posted on this story and others like it as they continue to develop. And that, my friends, will bring our episode to a close once more. As always, thank you so much for joining me on the program today. From TrialSite News, I am Adrian, and I will see you all next time.